Hi guys, welcome to History with Robin. Today we are going to be talking about the gold rush. So you can sort of see in the picture behind me, you can see some people working on finding some gold, and that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, and I am dressed, I know you guys will ask about what my costume is. I am dressed as a 49er, which is what they called the men and women, I suppose, who came to San Francisco in 1849 in order to find gold. So that is my costume. Hello, everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Okay, we're gonna get started. So let me just pull up my screen, my slideshow. So the US history, we're going to be talking about the gold rush, and we end up talking a little bit about the state of California and how California grew as a state. Hi Denali, hi Riley, hi Milo. Oh, that's so cool that you live near San Francisco. So you might know a lot of these things we're going to talk about. Hi Lorna, Joseph, Lisa, Oliver, thank you guys so much for being here with me. Okay, so before we talk about the gold rush, we're going to go way back in time to the 1500s. Okay. Sorry, you guys are so good on the questions. Lila, we're going to talk about the gold rush. No problem being late. And that's okay if you live on the East Coast. If you don't live near California, we can still learn about it because it's an important part of history. So to understand this amazing time of the gold rush in US history, we need to look a little bit further back in history to the history of Mexico. And even further back than that to the year 1519. So in what is now Mexico, the Native American tribe or group called the Aztecs were by far the most powerful empire. They had the biggest empire. They were like the most powerful group in what became Mexico at that time. So in 1519, which was 27 years after Columbus, who worked for Spain, discovered the New World, there was a Spanish explorer whose name was Hernan Cortes, and he landed on the east coast of what is now Mexico. He had 450 soldiers with him and 16 war horses, which I can only imagine are huge, powerful, strong horses. And he was not planning to be an explorer like Lewis and Clark. His plan was to conquer the Native Americans living in that land and claim the land for Spain. He was what was called a conquistador, which is the Spanish word for conqueror. Thank you, Joseph, for telling us what the name of the I think it's Montezuma, right, was the emperor of the Aztecs. So this man, Cortes, the first tribes he fought against had thousands of warriors, but Cortes was able to beat them because his men had guns, they had steel armor, and they had horses. But soon Cortes discovered there were smaller tribes, lots of different smaller tribes, and that further in from the coast, inland, there was a huge tribe called the Aztecs, and they had 100,000 warriors. Now, Cortes knew there was no way he was going to be able to win against them unless he convinced the smaller tribes to join him. And a lot of those smaller tribes decided to join him. Yes, that's a really good point, Joseph. One of the reasons, I'm going to talk about a reason why they might have been willing to do that, but another reason they were willing, the other tribes were willing to join with Cortes, was because he was different. And they sort of saw him maybe as a blessed or godlike figure. So another reason why they would want to join with him is because the Aztecs had expanded their power by conquering those tribes, and they were still very mean to them afterwards. And those tribes hated the Aztecs more than they hated the Spanish. So Cortes and his Native American allies, the people who decided to fight with him, they kind of all ganged up on the Aztecs, and in 1521 defeated them in gigantic battles. So Spain went on to expand their territory after 1519 when they beat the Aztecs. And by about 300 years later, they controlled all of this sort of pinky purple area on the map. But they don't control that anymore. Now it's the United States. And the reason, one of the reasons that they lost control of it is that they didn't study history and apply the lessons from history. They sort of acted like the Aztecs or like King George, meaning that they were a little mean to the people who lived under them and didn't give them respect or freedom as like citizens. So in 1810, the people in Mexico, they had a revolution to get independence from Spain. So the first time they tried it, they lost, but they tried again 4 years later, and they lost again. But then 7 years after that, Spain finally agreed to give Mexico its independence. So now you can see what was controlled by Spain before now was the country of Mexico. However, the new government of Mexico also didn't learn and apply the lessons of history. They didn't always treat the people well living in what is now the state of Texas. So in 1832, there was a war between the country of Mexico and the people living in Texas. And 4 years later, Texas won and they became independent of Mexico. They formed their own country, which they called the Republic of Texas. That's great, Lila, that you love Texas. I love Texas too. And actually, it's very funny. If you know people from Texas or you are from Texas, that they still sort of consider themselves the Republic of Texas. So by 1840, the area that we now call the United States looked a little bit like the way it does on this map. So not many people lived in what would become California. There were probably about 150,000 Native Americans, and there were about 12,000 people, which were a mix of Native American, from Native American blood and Spanish blood. And those 12,000 people were called Mexicans. But they didn't really think of themselves as Mexicans. They thought of themselves as Californios. So as you can see, here's the Republic of Texas down in Texas, claimed by Texas, but controlled by Mexico. And then the blue part is Mexico. So California, the area that would become California, was mostly ignored by the new government of Mexico, mostly because this area was far away and the Mexican government, they had other more important things to be worrying about than what was happening in that area that is California. So it was a beautiful new country, and there were other people who decided they wanted to move there and start new lives. One of these men, who was really important to the development of California and it becoming a state, his name was John Sutter. And he was born in 1803 in Switzerland, and he came to California when he was 30 years old. And this is a picture of him right here. Obviously not when he was 30 years old, but a little bit later in life. The person who was the governor of California gave him 78 square miles of land in a part of California that's now Sacramento, which, if you're from California or you know about state capitals, Sacramento is the state capital of California. And it was there that he built something called Sutters Fort, and that was his headquarters. And his plan was to really work his land and grow food and get things ready for the people he knew were going to come. So he hired Californios, which remember are the people who are of mixed Spanish and Native American blood. And he also hired Native Americans to help. He invited carpenters, blacksmiths, masons, which are people who build things out of stone, and other skilled craftsmen to come and live and work in the fort. And here's a little picture of the fort. You guys have some great questions. What did he pay them with? Lorna, I'm sure he paid them possibly with gold or money. He might have also paid them, done things that like traded them with things, like maybe if they came and worked for a little bit, they could live in the fort or help provide them with goods. I see I missed some of your guys' questions. Yes, Lorna, the unorganized territory is the Louisiana Purchase. That's right. That kind of fits together with the other things. No problem, Shrishti, sorry, I probably said your name wrong, but we are talking about the California Gold Rush and how California sort of became a state. So this is a picture of a man named John Sutter who built a fort and realized lots of people are going to want to come to California. Lots of people are going to want to live there. And so he was starting to build that. So, and Sutter was right. Other people started to come. Some pioneers who had gone to Oregon on the Oregon Trail decided to leave there for California. They heard that California had warmer weather than Oregon, which is true. They wanted to maybe live somewhere where it maybe wasn't so rainy or so cold. And they were called the Emmons Party, and they traveled south and they arrived at Sutters Fort in 1841. And Sutter welcomed them and he helped them get settled. Because sorry guys, I went the wrong way. Sometimes I do that. Because California was sort of being ignored by Mexico, and because so few people lived there, by this time, England, France, and America, so the America on the East Coast, had ideas that they wanted to settle it, and it could become part of their own country. So those three countries wanted to claim California for their own. So they realized Mexico wasn't really paying enough attention, and they thought it could be a really good addition to their country. So for America, the first step was to map that land in between their country and the Pacific Ocean, and find out if there were other land routes for settlers to get there. So they knew about the Oregon Trail. You know, at this time, the Oregon Trail had been blazed or created. They had the route of Lewis and Clark, but they wanted to find out if there were other ways, maybe easier ways, faster ways, so that the settlers could get to California. So they decided, the American government decided to talk to a man called John Fremont, and that became his job. So John Fremont was born in 1831. His family was very poor, but he was smart, and he did well in school, and he got really good at math and science. And part of the job that he got hired to do by the US Army was to make maps. And he became a lieutenant. He did really well in the Army. When he was 27, he fell in love with a woman named Jessie Bennett, and they got married. So there's something that's very special. Oh, thank you, Milo. You are right. I read that incorrectly. I said the wrong thing. I apologize. Jensen, great question. What does this have to do with the gold rush? Well, the maps that that Fremont made actually made it possible for more people to come to California, which is a connection to the gold rush. Oh, that's so cool, Devin, that you went to Sutters Fort and spent the night there. It's really, really cool. Good. Denali, I'm not sure if the Fremont Bridge was named after him. It might have been named after somebody else. So these are these maps. So Fremont made these really great maps that are called topographic maps. That means they show how high or low the land is on the map. So if you guys look at this map, that is this picture here, do you see how this map makes it so you can kind of see the hills and the valleys? The places where the curves or the circles are closer together, that's actually higher land. And where they're further apart, that's sort of maybe a valley. So with a map like this, you can actually see where to make the trail the best route so you don't have to climb up and down hills. So that was the kind of map. That was the kind of map that Fremont was making. What is the gold rush? Great question, Lila. The gold rush was a time in American history and in the history of California where gold was discovered in California, and then lots of people rushed to go to California so that they could find gold. So Fremont, beginning in 1842, Fremont was put in charge of an expedition to map that territory between the Mississippi River, which is the end of my arrow, not the pointed part, but the other part, and the Pacific Ocean. And he wanted to find a way where you could get to California, but you didn't have to go into Oregon first. And this was a huge job. It was maybe going to be nearly impossible. So there were two giant mountain ranges to cross to get to California. The Rocky Mountains, which we talked a little bit about yesterday. That's a huge stretch of mountains that starts in Canada, goes through like Colorado, down into Mexico. And then there's another range of mountains called the Sierra Nevada Mountains. So once you cross the Rocky Mountains, when you get close to California, maybe the edge of Nevada, you're going to have to go through the Sierra Nevada Mountains too. So that's like a lot of mountains that you're going to have to go through. But Fremont was smart, and so he did the smart thing. He hired some mountain men. So those were men, if you were with me yesterday, you know, they were very adventurous men who traveled through the mountains and went on lots of adventures like trapping beavers, shooting bears, and they kind of knew the ways to get through those mountains. He hired two of them. One of them's name was Kit Carson, and the other one was Thomas Broken Hand Fitzpatrick. I can only imagine it's because he had broken his hand at one time. Isis, good question. What is Fremont's first name again? John Fremont. Thank you. Okay, so he hired these guys. He also hired on his expedition 37 experienced frontiersmen. So those were men who had lived in the frontier, kind of knew the land, the area, how to hunt things, just men who had a lot of experience. And in 1843, they set out to find the best way through these uncharted mountains. They didn't know if it was possible, but they were really gonna try. Why didn't he hire Joseph Meek? I think because Joseph Meek already was living in Oregon and probably very happy there. He was looking for some other men. There were lots of men who could go back and forth. So they used this expedition used Native American guides when they could. They finally made it through the Rockies. By the time they got to the next set of mountains, the Sierra Nevada mountains, it was January 19th. So their guides had said no one had ever gone over those in the winter. But this expedition really wanted to try, and their guides actually ended up abandoning them because they thought it was so crazy to try to do that. They didn't think it was going to be really safe. So Fremont, Carson, and Fitzpatrick, they went ahead and they found a way. They left the rest of the people there, and they found a way through, and then they came back. It took a whole month, But they were very lucky because no one froze or starved to death, and they had gotten through. Lorna, great question. A frontiersman like Daniel Boone? Yes. Someone who knows how to survive in that area. So they found a way through finally. They didn't think they were going to. Their guides abandoned them because they thought they were so crazy for trying, but they made it through. Once they, Andrew, yes, the movie, like if you have seen The Revenant, that is very much those men who lived in the mountains and did that type of work. So once they came back, those three men made their way through and they came back to get the rest of their party, they worked their way down back over the Sierra Nevada mountains and down into the valley. And on February 19th, they arrived at Sutters Fort. John Sutter thought they looked like human skeletons wearing Scotch caps. So it was really a very hard journey for them, but they did make it. So Sutter greeted them warmly. He fed them. He gave them fresh horses, equipment, and supplies. And Sutter really knew that they had done something impossible. They had found a way, and it had become known as the California Trail. So with the maps that Fremont made, others could now follow, though hopefully not in the wintertime, because that's very, very hard. So on this map, you can see the green line that goes, that is the California Trail. Now, for a lot of the, for a part of the California Trail, it overlaps with the Oregon Trail. So I think it's to Fort Hall right here, if you guys can see, in Idaho. That's the part where the trail splits off. And the Oregon Trail at Fort Hall continues on to Oregon, and the California Trail goes somewhat southwest to Sutters Fort. So, but now people could come, but hopefully they won't come in the winter because you don't want to get stuck in those mountains. And others did follow. In the next 2 years, more pioneers came over the mountains to settle in California near Sutters Fort. It was a very difficult trail in many places, but most were able to get through. It wasn't easy, just like you can see in this picture. Sometimes they'd have to push their wagons up rocks, rocky hills, or they'd have different troubles coming over the mountains, but most of them made it through. But by 1846, there were other troubles that would happen, which would affect California and everyone who lived there. Great question. Adia, sorry, I probably said your name wrong. Sutters Fort is where the gold rush started. That's right. What's a pioneer? A pioneer is a person who goes to a new place. They go to a new place. In this time in history, we're talking about people who move to a new area, maybe to start a new life. What supplies would you need for the California Trail? Lorna, great question. I'm pretty sure they'd probably be exactly the same as the Oregon Trail. It is because it's really, really similar. Maybe you might need an extra pair of shoes because you're going to go over some more mountains. So what was happening at this time that was going to affect them? So remember, we talked a little bit earlier in this about the Republic of Texas. So in 1845, America offered to the Republic of Texas to become a US state. And a lot of the people who lived in Texas wanted to become a US state, but the country of Mexico really hated that idea. There was an idea in parts of Mexico that they thought that the Republic of Texas should still belong to them. And some of those people wanted to attack and conquer Texas to make it part of Mexico again. So because of that, Amelia, we don't have a book for this. We just sort of talk about it and you look at my slideshow. Lorna, we're almost to the gold rush. I promise. I promise we're going to be there in just a second. So some Americans, they really wanted to fight Mexico and then get control of all of the gray area on the map. Now, what's the gray area is now California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. So there were people who wanted to fight for it, and then there were people who wanted to buy it. And they actually offered to buy it from Mexico, but Mexico didn't want to sell it. So in 1846, they first started fighting for it. At that time, John Fremont and his men were back in California on another mapping expedition, but he also had secret orders as well. So the United States knew that France and England wanted to get control of California. So Fremont's orders were, if the war broke out between America and Mexico, he was to get control of California before England or France did. So most American settlers and many of the Californios wanted to be part of America because they liked the idea of the Constitution and the freedom. Others just wanted independence from Mexico. So on June 15th, 1846, without firing a shot, a group of Californians went to the California capital of Monterey and met with the Californios in charge. And they agreed to raise the California Republic flag. So California was independent, sort of, now. So remember John Fremont and his secret orders. So he and his men, they went to work. They asked John Sutter to turn over his fort to the United States. And Sutter was happy to do that, and he welcomed them back. Because Sutter had been in charge of most of Northern California for Mexico, all of that land was now under the US control. And you could say that Fremont conquered it, but nobody really cared because most of the people around there wanted to be part of America as well. What's with the envelope stamp top secret? I think it's just because he had top secret orders to do that. He was a little bit of a spy. Joseph, I agree. Mexico probably should have just taken the United States up on their offer to buy the land from them because they fought a war and they ended up losing it. So that is a really good point. So now, because Sutter agreed, sorry, went the wrong way, guys, to turn his fort over and the land, now it became part of the United States. So shortly after this, on July 7th, a US warship sailed to Monterey and sent Marines ashore. Because they didn't find anybody there, they took down the California Republic flag and they raised the American flag, which is what you can see that picture is. Just then, a British warship showed up in the harbor, hoping that they could take control of Monterey in California. But when they saw the American flag flying, they just gave up on the idea and they sailed away. And so that is how the California became a US state. So after it became a state, not a lot changed. More American settlers came over the mountains on the California Trail or decided to come down from Oregon. Even after that, Sutter was still in charge of his fort and he owned land near the mountains. He actually owned a lot of land around this fort. And so on January 24th, in 1848, one of his men who was working there to build a sawmill, which is where they cut up like wood, made planks of wood and different things from wood by a water wheel, he found some gold flakes in the stream bed. So he just came across it. At first, he and Sutter tried to keep it a secret. But you can imagine if you found gold, you'd want to talk about it. You'd want to tell people you found gold. So it's kind of a really hard secret. And somehow the word got around. So soon, people all over California, they heard there was gold around Sutters Fort, and they wanted to come look for it. Way more than half the people in San Francisco quit their jobs and went to that area, which they called the gold fields, to pan for gold. Now, one of the things that they would do, you can sort of see in this picture, they would do something called pan for gold. So now the gold, there were chunks of gold, there were flakes of gold, and some of it was mixed up in the water, in the sand, in the soil. And so what they would do is they would take this soil, like you'd see these guys on the edge of the river, they're scooping up the sand or the soil, putting it in the pan, and they had this whole technique of the way they would kind of swirl it around to separate the soil from the gold flakes. And so many people, I can't believe half the people in San Francisco quit their jobs, but it's true. That's so many people. So San Francisco was practically a ghost town. There were not that many people left there. By the summer of 1848, there were over 4,000 people panning for gold, but that was nothing compared to the number of people that would be coming in the next year. Sorry guys, I know you're asking me some questions. I'm trying to get to the Q&A box. I apologize. I'll keep trying and I'll read my next part. So here we go. Thank you. Yes, Joseph, this huge event was started by one man finding gold. So it seems kind of funny to say it that way, but it became a huge thing because people wanted to find gold. They dreamed of finding gold, ever since the beginning of the United States, when the Virginia Company came from England, their original goal was to find gold. So it is something that has been really very important. So the next year in 1849, thousands of people from all over the world came to California. From the eastern US, tens of thousands of people loaded up wagons and came over the California Trail that Fremont had blazed and mapped. They were called the 49ers because they came in 1849. By the end of the year, over 100,000 people had flooded into the California mountains to pan for gold in the streams. That is so many people. Were they actually successful? Many people did find gold. There was a lot of gold in that streams. Still, there were so many people looking that, there was so much gold and so many people that even though there were so many people, most found enough to do much more than pay for just their food and supplies. Another thing that happened that was interesting is that merchants came because with all those people, they needed supplies, they needed to buy things, they needed new things. So besides all those people coming to look for gold, there was a whole group of merchants who came to bring the supplies that they would need and sell them to them. And the merchants actually sometimes made a lot more money than the gold miners themselves. Now, there is a story about a merchant, which maybe you guys have heard about, that got really famous and really well known during the gold rush, and his name is Levi Strauss. Now, if you know, maybe you know this, but blue jeans are sometimes called Levi's, and Levi's are a brand of jeans or blue jeans. And he realized that these miners, these men, would need really sturdy or strong cloth to make pants, to make bags, to make tarps, to make whatever they needed during this time of the gold rush. And so he found this really strong, or maybe he made this really strong cloth, and he sold it to them. And that actually is the beginning of blue jeans and Levi's. That's right. This is the beginning of that that modern company, Levi's or blue jeans. So that's just something that came out of the gold rush. So these merchants, they made a lot of money, but still more and more miners kept coming. So the gold rush continued for about 10 years. By the time it was over, there were almost 400,000 Americans living in California. So remember, before this, there were very, very little, a few people. They found billions of dollars of gold in the value of today's money. And California went from being this sleepy, quiet little place with few people living in it, to being a big, booming, rich state. And San Francisco was growing right as the heart of it, the middle part of it. So for people who didn't travel overland to California, some of them would sometimes take boats. It would take longer. It might not be safer. I'm not sure really why they would do that. But they would take boats there, and boats from other countries that brought people would all come to San Francisco. And San Francisco, so it was because of the gold rush that San Francisco grew so big and important. And so you can see this is an old picture down here of San Francisco, and you can see those boats coming in. So California had John Sutter and John Fremont to thank for making it possible that California actually exists as a state. But poor Sutter, all those 49ers, they came to his land, they lived on it, they trampled it, and they accidentally destroyed his crops. He went from being practically the king of Northern California, to being totally broke. And after the gold rush, he moved away and died in 1880 as a poor man. So even though it was his land where that gold was found, he didn't really profit from it. I would agree, that's kind of rough. But John Fremont, on the other hand, didn't end up a poor man. He bought some land in California to settle down on with his family, and it turned out that it had lots of gold on it. So he started life very poor, but he now was very rich. He later became a state senator, where he represented California in making the laws that have to do with it. And he also was a general in the Civil War. But the thing he was the most proud of was making these maps. And because he accomplished what he thought was going to be impossible, and he also was able to create something which helped all these people during the gold rush. And he lived a really long life, dying in 1890. So, America won the war against Mexico. Peace was signed on February 2nd, 1848, and America got control of all the orange area of the map, and Americans could settle there. So the pink, the dark pink is California, which already was part of it. And then when they won the war, they got all of that orange land, and they could settle there. So you can see that's like Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona. And because of the maps that John Fremont made and the trails he blazed, now those pioneers could know where they were going and how to get there. So thank you guys so much for joining me on my webinar about the history of California, the gold rush, and lots of other things thrown in there. I hope you guys learned something. if you guys are interested in finding out more about the books that I use to create these presentations and webinars, you can check out heronbooks.com. And I hope you guys will join me next week. I'm going to do a couple next week. I'm glad you guys are enjoying this, and I hope you have a great day, and I will see you guys next week.